Chat.
Thank you, Mr. Garnett, for joining Eye on the Biz. Here today we are at the Impact Exhibition Center to participate in what we see on our backdrop, Dynamic Spectrum Alliance Global Summit 2013, which is the first global summit of DSA. Could you tell us a bit about your organization, how it was formed, and who are your major members?
So the Dynamic Spectrum Alliance is an organization comprised of research and development organizations, academic institutions, and different companies who are in the wireless ecosystem. So anything from large international brands like Facebook and Microsoft and Google, MediaTek, a large chipset manufacturer in Taiwan, all the way to small little startup companies that are doing work in the radio space. The reason why the Dynamic Spectrum Alliance formed in the first place is really to help address two challenges that are facing consumers around the world and governments around the world. One is issues around digital inclusion and finding ways to use new wireless technologies to help to expand access to broadband over wireless and make it less expensive. And then also to deal with the explosion of devices and the explosion of data on wireless networks, which is a particular issue in urban markets, really anywhere in the world. So even here in a place like Bangkok, there are going to be issues around spectrum being overused, and we need to find new ways to use these radio spectrums. So dynamic spectrum access really is the idea of using new technologies to use frequencies, radio frequencies, much more smartly, so that we can create more bandwidth out of a limited amount of spectrum resources, and make that bandwidth less expensive, and make connectivity more ubiquitous, so more people have it when they need it, where they need it. And so the idea is working with each other to help develop the technologies, but also working with government to help educate them about the technologies, and then put the regulations in place that we need in order for these new technologies to become global.
Since I can notice that Microsoft is the main force behind this summit, is Microsoft also the main force behind this new organization, DSA?
I wouldn't say that we're the main force. After all, there are 32 different companies and organizations that are the founding members of this alliance. But we have been quite active in helping to create this, and we got together with a small group of companies about a year and a half ago, and brought up this idea of, it's probably time for us to form a group that will work with government on the regulations. Now that the technology seems to be becoming more mature, it's ready to come to market, we've proven to ourselves that it's technically feasible. Now it's time for us to get together as a group and create regulatory models that can be harmonized on a global basis. And so that's the reason that we did this.
Okay, so explain to our audience, which I don't think that we are the technical audience here, how you're gonna make the scarcity of spectrum to become abundance. What is the technology you are talking about here?
In the world we live in today, broadband has become essential, right? I mean, people, for them to participate in the economy, for them to participate in society, internet access and broadband access is almost a given. People talk about it now as almost like a human right. And increasingly that broadband access is happening over wireless devices. So people are using their smartphones or their tablets or some other kind of wireless device to connect and connect to each other and use all of their social applications, Facebook, you name it, to interact with each other. And people are using those networks more and more. They're pushing more and more data on those networks. That's creating some real challenges. Traditionally, radio spectrum, or the frequencies, have been assigned to particular users for their exclusive use. And the problem is that you may have been assigned a spectrum, these frequencies, 40 or 50 years ago, but you don't really use them all that intensively. Now that might have worked just fine when people didn't really use wireless technology that much, but nowadays people use it so much that it's really taxing the system. So we have to come up with new ways to use these frequencies, new dynamic ways to gain access to these frequencies, so that we can basically turn what are very limited amounts of available frequencies to create broadband networks, to increase the total available bandwidth. So the idea is we have these new technologies where radios, like smartphones, like laptops, like tablets, become smarter, and they can choose frequencies based on what the application is, what the particular need is. And they're not stuck using one frequency. They can use different types of frequencies for different kinds of connections. And that will require changes to regulations, and that's the reason why we've created this Dynamic Spectrum Alliance, so we can have that conversation with regulators to move forward on this.
Mm-hmm. And I think we heard the terms white space a lot, which is, I believe that is part of the technology that will make spectrum more wider accessible. Can you explain this term to us? What is the white space?
Well, the simplest way to think of white spaces is just any unused frequency. So think of the old TV, the old analog TVs that we had when we were kids, and you had the old knob on the TV, and you'd switch to one channel and you had the broadcast on that channel, and then you switch to the next channel and it's just the fuzz on the TV and there's nothing there. Think of that as white space. Any unused channel in the TV broadcast frequencies will be considered white spaces. And then not just in the TV bands, but any other frequencies. Any unused frequency, whether it's not been assigned to a particular user or it's just not being used at that particular time by someone who has a license. So that's white spaces. And so the idea is, can we use these new wireless technologies to gain access to these unused frequencies to deliver more bandwidth to customers when they need it and to reduce the cost of that access?
I believe that, if I'm not wrong, I think the people that when they allocate the frequency, they said in the old day that they have to leave certain space or something, so they no jams or no interfering with each other. So what is the new technology that will be able to plug those gaps?
Yes. So traditionally in broadcast planning, so for broadcasters, there was a very large amount of frequency that was allocated for broadcast, and they were very high power. So you had really, really high power, so you could cover a large geographic area with your broadcast. So these were very high power transmissions, but the broadcasters were not able to protect themselves from interference very well. So they were very high power, and the TVs themselves couldn't protect themselves from interference. They didn't have good filters in the TVs. So you had to create big spaces between TV channels. So you wouldn't put channel 4 next to channel 5 in the frequency bands. You'd have to have a space between those two so they wouldn't interfere with each other. You also had situations where you frankly just didn't have a lot of broadcast, so you had a lot of unused frequencies because of that as well. Now in the transition from analog to digital TV, you're able to have broadcasts closer together because you're going from analog to digital, but also because the digital television receivers are better at protecting themselves from interference. So you can have broadcasts occur much closer to each other. So and that frees up a lot of frequency that could be used for other things without causing interference to broadcast. So even in the analog world, there is unused frequency, and you could operate at low power without causing interference to broadcast reception, and we've shown that in some of the projects we've worked with. But in the switch to digital, we're going to free up a lot of spectrum that could be put to other uses. So some of that will be licensed. You'll have some of that frequency will be freed up and licensed to the mobile operators, and then other frequencies will remain unused. And the question is, what kinds of regulations and policies will we put in place in order to put that spectrum to good use as well?
And are we is this idea going to make use of this unused frequency mainly for Wi-Fi broadband, or there are other purposes as well.
Radio frequency really is an enabler. It can enable all kinds of applications, all kinds of technologies. So the idea basically is we can use these unused frequencies for a whole host of applications. So it could be for Wi-Fi, it could be for a new kind of Wi-Fi. People call it super Wi-Fi, basically the idea of taking Wi-Fi technologies and Wi-Fi spectrum access techniques and putting that into these unused TV bands, these unused TV white spaces. Or it could be machine-to-machine types of applications, smart city applications. Or it could be something else we're not even thinking of right now. That could be something unexpected that we discover when we use these frequencies.
Okay. So in this break, Mr. Garnett has told us what is DSA, or Dynamic Spectrum Alliance. In the next break, he will discuss more details about what the new organization is doing, and he will also discuss some of the pilot projects that DSA has been doing in different parts of the world. So please stay tuned with us.